O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel.
We have nearly 40% of the city are Arab-Palestinian citizens of the city of Jerusalem. And we're all here together, and we hardly have any interaction with each other. So while we're the most cosmopolitical and we live 30 seconds from each other, we don't know each other at all. We don't come each other's homes. We don't go to each other's schools. We don't pray in any way together. We don't even know what each other are praying for or with, or we don't know really anything about each other.
I wanted to find a way to write about Jerusalem. For in the end of the day, that's what I'm writing about. The rock is a stand-in. The rock stands in for that which is impossible to divide about this city. I mean, if you're going to divide this city, if we're going to have a peace settlement in the Middle East, the sort of reigning idea is we're going to have to chop everything up and give everybody a piece. But how do you cut a rock? How do you divide it in half? The rock will always be there. It will be Jewish and it will be Muslim at the same time, which tells you something very important about Jerusalem, it seems to me. That Jerusalem belongs to more than one faith. No one person, no one faith can claim it.
The Haram Al-Sharif, the Temple Mount, that area is a very important area for Christians as well. We, of course, recognize the continuing history of that place, its importance for Jews, its importance for Muslims. And we go there in order to revere the memory. Without memory, there is no identity. You are nobody if you don't remember where you come from.
Understanding the geographic context of Palestine, understanding the geographic context of Jerusalem, I am certain that we will have a Jerusalem, a Palestine that is home to all three Abrahamic religions, where all three religions are able to practice peacefully, and where all three faiths and people from a multitude of ethnic backgrounds are able to live freely. I am positive of that. How long is that going to take? I don't know. How many Palestinians will suffer? What that suffering will look like, what the Israelis might face in between where we are now and getting there, I think that is up to us.
You know, the word that's frequently used today is the word narrative. It's a word I don't particularly like because it means there's no objective truth. There's just what you believe and what I believe. But despite what I just said, you have to show a certain respect for the narrative of the other side. That is part of coexistence. That is part of peacemaking. If you deny that history, you deny that past, you'll never reach peace.
The Temple Mount occupies about 1/6 of the total area of the old city. It makes the largest religious compound of the ancient world. The Temple Mount is the place where Solomon built the first temple. That is the place where the returnees to Zion from the Babylonian captivity built the second temple.
That from a Christian point of view reached a peak in the 1st century when Jesus of Nazareth was born. And then, of course, the temple becomes a very important place for the working out of the Jesus narrative. Jesus was brought to the temple when he was 40 days old, and there he was presented in a house which he calls his Father's house. Later on, there will be in all of the Gospels a description of Jesus's visits to the temple, and also his teaching in the temple, miracles that he did in the temple, and of course some of the arguments that he had with the religious authorities of his time, arguments that would eventually lead to his death.
It is the place where we believe that when the Prophet, peace be upon him, was taken in the miraculous journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, the ascension, what we consider as a very important event in shaping our religion, was this ascension. We call it al-Mi'raj, took place there, exactly on that spot.
I reject the idea that it's too big an issue for ordinary people to engage in. And there's lots of ways to do that. Reading things, understanding things better, understanding each other's problems and fears and circumstance. Because almost all of this comes out of ignorance. When you think about the three religions, the three key religions in Jerusalem, the religions are 90 whatever %. It's the same thing. The narratives are different. What they're preaching about how to live a righteous life, it's all the same.
Jerusalem is filled literally with some of the most extraordinary light on the planet. And Jerusalem, in a way, is the embodiment of the human race. It is the most ethnically diverse city in the world. You have all of humanity. It is both the greatest peril as well as the greatest opportunity of mankind. So in Jerusalem, you have a panoply, a plethora of faiths, of religions, of ethnicities, of cultures. But what we need to be talking about from a genuinely religious, and when I say religious, I don't just mean doctrine and dogma and institutions and organized entities, none of which can be looked to at this point as the genuine peace builders on the planet. But if you look to the actual religious experience, the spiritual nuggets, the true gold at the center of all the great religions, you don't see differences, so you don't see anything to tolerate. You see very common unifying themes, and those common unifying themes are what call us. That is the ground, I think, on which God is asking us to stand. It is the ground inside our hearts.
The early Muslims from Arabia were a Bedouin nomadic people. They had no monumental traditions. They had never ever built a monument before. They had not built much of anything in the way of buildings. The Kaaba in Mecca is a very primitive, simple object. 4 walls, didn't even have a roof in the beginning. So to go from that kind of tradition of building, so primitive, to something as complex, as monumental, as symbolic, laden with symbolisms inside and outside and in the dome, on the walls, all over the place, is quite a remarkable jump. All of those features of the building, the Dome of the Rock, and above all the fact that it celebrates a rock, raised for me the question, what does it mean? Where did it come from? What did the rock mean to early Muslims?
People talk about the issue related to the rock being a problem with real estate. That's just not true. Real estate problems are easy to solve. You make a deal, you trade off. The real problem around the rock is this whole issue that each side has their own narrative, their own story, and has turned off listening to the other. Them is by far the most dangerous four-letter word in the English language.
Today, Muslims and Jews, and to a lesser extent Christians, because they're less interested in the site today, compete with one another over this by denying each other's right. And the idea that I should be in the business of competing, that it is actually of more importance to me than to you, because I was here before or because you didn't exist before, is stupid and deeply destructive and, of course, irresolvable.
When I came as a young student, 18-year-old student, to study in the Old City, I remember still the first lecture I heard by the big head of dean of my yeshiva at Yeshivat HaKotel in Jerusalem. And he said, they'll be able to solve all the problems of the peace negotiations. We're talking back in 1972, 73. They'll never solve this 1 square kilometer here around where we were sitting studying. I want to prove him wrong.
This was the place that we met for the first time, Jews and Arabs, and talked about everything. This is a program called Through Others' Eyes. We did a photograph course, and we met in our houses.
It was the first time we saw an Arabic house and realized it's not so different from our homes. Like, I thought I'm going to find the bodies in the closet, and I don't know. I didn't know what to expect.
The last visiting was in my home, and I'm tell my mother that we need to do something big, like a lot of food, delicious food. My mother do delicious food. Yeah.
My friends in general, when I came to them and started telling them about this project and how amazing it is, they didn't really care, and it seemed like it's so distant from them, and it didn't bother them that they didn't know a whole different culture that is living 5 minutes away from them.
Si on dit c'est l'éducation, ça voudrait dire que le problème, ce sont simplement les jeunes générations. Bien sûr, si on dit la culture, ça englobe toutes les générations. Quand on voit des textes ou des dessins ou des films ou des pièces de théâtre qui sont remises en cause parce que justement ça choquerait certains croyants. On est en régression. C'est-à-dire que la culture se plie à un diktat de la religion.
ברוך הבא בשם אדוני. ברוך אתה בשערי ירושלים. הוד קדושתך, הגעת למדינת ישראל, בחיים היום בני דתות ובני לאומים שונים, יהודים, נוצרים, מוסלמים, דרוזים וצ'רקסים. ישראל מקיימת שלום בתוכה ושואפת לשלום עם שכניה.
since the time of the Crusades, letting out rivers of blood for Jerusalem became even fashionable. And this is sad.
The ways of the Crusaders were not the ways of Jesus. The whole event of the Crusades needs to be understood in the context of European history, of the hostility towards Muslims. The Crusaders went through Europe too often, slaughtering Jewish communities, Muslim communities. That has become very, very problematic in the Christian memory. I feel that I'm very privileged to have lived at a time where popes are asking forgiveness for that kind of behavior by Christians. I think that today, most Christians, I hope, would have an enormously hard time with the concept of holy war.
When His Holiness the Pope came to Jerusalem, he went to the old city, he went to the Temple Mount, took out a piece of paper and wrote a prayer to God. He knew the tradition that you put like a letter to God inside the wall between the different stones. That's what he did.
I don't think that people should go and bomb things around and kill themselves and kill people for a shrine. But we need to protect it because it is part of us. We'll not just dump it and let go because some people want it for their own. So it is a sensitive line between, yes, we have to struggle to keep it, but what kind of price is going to be paid? If the price is human lives, it should not. We should pursue all other ways.
Sit down, sit down. In Jerusalem, I met a small group, Jewish, Palestinians, so together. So I very much impressed, although small. But there are such a group of people who really trying to bring harmony among Palestine and Israelis.
Well, I think there is no reason not to achieve any kind of historical compromise between the Palestinian nation and the Israelis in this Holy Land. There is no reason. Now, I cannot really tolerate any ideology which might push this dream away from being a reality on this ground. I think the Palestinians, together with the Arab world, with the Islamic world, have decided since 2002 on the basis of what we call the Arab Initiative for Peace. They are ready to recognize Israel's right to exist within secure borders. They are ready to normalize relationship with more than 56 Arab and Muslim countries in the world, by the way, with the Israeli state. And they can open embassies for the Israeli state in all 56 capitals of Arab and Muslim world.
Which is a new situation, which hasn't been like that for 100 years of conflict. So in that way, you can say that's the good news. But we know where we have to go to. And we know where we are, which is terribly far away from where we have to go to.
There's no possibility of making a deal right now because the political leadership on both sides, in my opinion, doesn't want it enough. And so it's not going to happen. But it's the regular people that have to, in the first place, believe there is somebody on the other side to talk to. That this idea that there's no one on the other side to talk to, and that's it, my Arab friends would say, halas, that's it. It's just not true. It's a default mechanism so that you don't have to talk. That there is somebody on the other side to talk to in both communities. I know because I've met them.
I can have a conversation with you and we can talk about our aspirations, but none of that erases the reality of the situation. And this is what happens when people say, you know, if people just sat together and talked, then everything would be okay. No, to whitewash things and say that this is a matter of psychological issues or emotional differences or people can't get along, this is an untruth. And it is a way to distract from the reality on the ground.
On 29th of November, 1947, the United Nations, with a petition plan, basically said they established a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews said yes, the Arabs said no.
Well, first, the partition plan of 1947, it called for, you know, a Palestinian Arab state and Israel. And it called also for Jerusalem to be put under international administration, and Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And I think that the international community came to that conclusion because nobody would accept that Jerusalem to be put under a narrow domain of one group. And then the war took place, and what happened, happened.
You have to remember that in 1948, the state of Israel loses the old city of Jerusalem to invading Arab armies, the most important of which for Jerusalem was the Arab Legion under what was called Transjordan and later the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Now, during the period that the Jordanians controlled the old city of Jerusalem from 1948 until the 1967 Six-Day War, several things occur in Jerusalem which affect how Israelis view the old city. First, some 55 synagogues and yeshivot, study halls, are either destroyed or desecrated in the old city. Second, the Jewish population that had lived there for hundreds of years is ethnically cleansed. They're evicted, and they exit in mass through the Zion Gate. And therefore, from the period of 1948 until 1967, the Jews have no access to Jerusalem. They have no access to the holy sites. And from different positions in high ground in Western Jerusalem, they wistfully look at the old city, but they don't go to the Western Wall, and they certainly don't go to the Temple Mount.
In 1967, the Jews conquered or liberated Jerusalem, depending on your point of view.
The Dome of the Rock, it's an irreducible aspect of the Palestinian national identity. And the fear of losing it and the fear of having to compete for it with someone else allows the devil to move in and create all the discord.
When Israel took the Temple Mount and the Western Wall in 1967, several things took place. One was, for instance, the raising of an Israeli flag over the Dome of the Rock. Moshe Dayan, who was at the time in charge, militarily speaking, ordered it taken down and offered the keys of the mountain to the Muslim Waqf, the Muslim religious authority.
Moshe Dayan said, "What do we do now with all of this Vaticano?" That was his sensation about taking the old city. He didn't have that mystic feeling that pervaded the Jewry all over the world.
It was a Jew who is an Egyptian Jew, who is very much familiar with all this, Moshe Dayan. He was the one who told them to give it back to them. It was Moshe Dayan. He grew up in Egypt before the creation of Israel. Moshe Dayan knew how the Dome of the Rock was perceived by his fellow Egyptians. There was no fighting between Jews and Arabs. No, he knew that story.
When I came here back in the 1979, 80s, I was able to go on the Temple Mount, the actual platform. I was able to walk into the mosque that is there now. I was able to see the stone behind the grill. So today it's very disheartening for me that I can't go there anymore.
This is 1926. In this picture, you see the Dome of the Rock, the Western Wall, and the Mughrabi Quarter. It was all bulldozed down in 1967. Over here, this building that you see today, it's the wooden ramp. It's all taken down in 67.
In 1967, when the Jewish people arrived, they cleared out the plaza, understanding that hundreds of thousands of people will be arriving here. We have around 11 million people visiting the Western Wall today, needing to make room for everyone. Here we see the Mughrabi Gate, where tourists and non-Muslims are allowed to enter the Temple Mount today.
The Western Wall was cleared of the neighborhood that stood in front of it so that the Jews, instead of worshiping in a 6-foot wide alley, would be able to worship in a big plaza, as we see it today. What this means is that in terms of the Western Wall, there isn't any status quo anymore. Temple Mount, on the other hand, because Moshe Dayan gave the keys to the religious authority of the Muslims in the hopes that it would encourage peace, has the status quo that it had before, which is the Muslims are there and the Jews aren't. The Muslims opened the Mount today to tourists, and the Israelis insisted that tourists have access to the Mount and that Jews among those tourists be allowed to access the Mount. The Muslims did not want Jews praying on the Mount. They did not want anybody worshiping near the mosque that is on one side of the Mount or anywhere else on the mountain. This was the site of the Holy Temple, so the Jews naturally want to be there and see it. The Supreme Court in Israel has ruled that the Jews have a right to access the site, because we have the right to access any site. It's a free country. But the police have a right to preserve order. And the feeling in the police is that if it disturbs the Muslim, it will create disorder. So they stop the Jews from praying there.
Why are non-Muslims not allowed to pray in Haram Al-Sharif? That will be wrong. They should be allowed. Who am I to prevent them? Of course, I don't even allow or disallow. It's important to them. It is, I don't own it. We are not in real estate business. This is the heritage of humanity and of people who believed in different things. And they should be free to exercise freedom of religion. But to say, no, it is mine, this is arrogance.
If this were simply a political dispute, I'm not saying it would be simple, but it would be the sort of thing that diplomats could readily resolve. But it's not simply a political dispute. It's infused with religion. And that gives it a degree of emotion. And it also brings in Jerusalem you're dealing with a place that's loaded with real and symbolic religious significance, which again makes compromise extraordinarily difficult.
It's a very, very sad situation. Very, very sad, very terrifying, and yet despite it all, cannot do it. If you take a walk there, the place is one of the most peaceful places for everyone. Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, anyone will sense that holiness. The Canaanites felt it, the feeling lingers.
Back now, this time for praying. I have to pray. Better run all the business, my friend.
Have I been in Jerusalem? Unfortunately not. I just felt that the opportunity for me to go to Jerusalem passed without being used. I am not ready to go and stop at checkpoints or being searched by soldiers that I consider occupiers.
We need to work it out together and find a solution, a political solution. But it needs to come also from the source of our existence here. And the source is in our identity.
We as religious people cannot really do this job as a separate part of the whole society. We do not have the power, by the way. Those who have the power are the states, the governments, the elected leaders.
The politicians don't understand. They've been trying to avoid it because they come from a Western concept of dichotomy, which divides religion, existence, identity out of political solutions. And therefore, they never understand the issues here. Therefore, they ignore it, and they think that if they ignore it, it'll go away. It doesn't go away, it just blows up in our faces.
Some groups in provocation start praying, in parts of Haram Al-Sharif instead of going to pray in their own synagogue. These are examples of provocation and incitement that would lead into reaction from the worshippers, the Muslim Palestinian worshippers, that often lead to confrontation.
I would say that since the Six-Day War in 1967, there has been a tendency every few years to come up with this libelous accusation that Israel aims to undermine the foundations of the Al-Aqsa Mosque at the southern end of the Temple Mount. The Israeli law forbids archaeological excavation on the Temple Mount. But nonetheless, this doesn't stop a number of Palestinian and other Arab leaders from making this false accusation.
Unfortunately, we've had attempts of people to incite to violence on the Temple Mount. There has been stone throwing, there have been Molotov cocktails that have been thrown at worshipers who are there, and sometimes Israel's police have to go in order to restore order. We hope that those problems would cease. We have no desire to change the religious status quo on the Temple Mount, and we hope people will respect those of other faiths who worship and pray.
The police and the special forces enter the Haram. They do not administer the interior of the Haram. They've actually went in and they've entered the mosque and they've done something that normally they're not supposed to do. So it is unacceptable, not just for us as Jordanians, but really for all Muslims. And this has upset so many people from all over the world, not just the Muslims, Palestinians, or Jordanians, but everybody in the world.
When you bring so many soldiers to protect extremists, the message that you are conveying to the Palestinian people that you want to control that compound and convert it into something else. You want to convert it into a Jewish holy site with structures, with building maybe the third temple and so on and so forth.
I do not believe that any responsible Jewish leader wants to take back the Temple Mount site, make the mosque go away, and therefore return it to what it was by force. This would ignite a world conflict. No responsible person is willing to do that. But I am for honesty. If Muslims can visit the Western Wall, Jews must be permitted to visit the Temple Mount, if they wish to do so.
Palestinians today have often, not universally, not everybody, but have from time to time expressed doubts whether or not there was a Jewish temple ever on this site, not realizing that by so doing, they are actually pulling the rug from under themselves, because the entire meaning of Jerusalem to modern Muslims throughout Muslim history rests on that previous Jewish tradition.
Here in the Western Wall tunnels, we're going to try to zoom in and pinpoint, in a way, the last period of the Second Temple, where the Romans, they're already in control in the area. They appoint a king here in Jerusalem by the name of Herod. And Herod, is he Jewish? Is he not? Does he consider himself to be Jewish? Not too clear. What is clear, the people, they don't like him.
Was there a Jewish temple in the place of the Haram Al-Sharif? This is so far is a claim that was never proven archaeologically, and this is probably justifying all the digging they are doing, because there is no proof yet.
We have, on the one hand, Israeli politicians who completely try to exaggerate the Jewish finds from the site while ignoring the Muslim finds from the site. On the other hand, we have idiotic claims by Palestinian politicians that there was no Jewish temple at the site either.
There are such comments on the part of some Muslims. We may disagree with them because our history of Christianity is rooted here in Jerusalem, starting with the Temple of Solomon. And we believe that it's the traditional site of the Temple of Solomon where the Mosque of Omar and the Al-Aqsa are erected.
Herod expands the face of the mountain and builds a very big platform over the whole area. To do so, he removes the mountain north of Mount Moriah, quarrying the stone from here to use in the buildings. And then he raises the areas to the south, and on top of that, he creates the platform, or the Temple Mount, as we know it today. And on top of that, we have the temple.
The summit of the Temple Mount, which is today occupied by the Dome of the Rock, would be the best place for locating the temple. Look at any aerial photograph of Jerusalem. You see that that building of the Dome of the Rock immediately dominates the picture. It's very interesting because the Temple Mount is kind of pushed in the southeastern corner of Jerusalem. It is not occupying a central focal point in the urban plan of Jerusalem. Nevertheless, it dominates any view of the city. So that is the place of the temple, beyond any doubt, beyond any doubt.
There was a Temple Mount guide brought out by the Waqf, say the 1927 issues, very clearly states that this was the site where Solomon had built his temple. But nowadays, it's too much of a political hot potato to say that. So the Muslims strenuously deny that there ever was a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount, on Haram Al-Sharif, as they call it themselves today.
This document, I think, is of critical importance to the subject of the Temple Mount. The original copies of the guide to the Holy City of Jerusalem that were published between the years 1924 and 1953. At that time, there was no state of Israel. And therefore, there was no conflict. So those who were in charge at the time, the Supreme Muslim Council, they published a guide. This guide is not published by some tourist agency. This guide is published by the Supreme Muslim Council, which is the ranking religious authority governing all Muslims living in the Holy Land. What do they write? Talking about the sanctity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, they say its sanctity dates from the earliest times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. This, too, is the spot, according to the universal belief, on which David built there an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Page 4 of the guide, every year this was in there, from 1924 to 53. But in 1954, the same guide appears, minus those two sentences. That is a very telling point. First of all, it tells the world that the Supreme Muslim Council absolutely believed that King Solomon's temple is beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. That's its location. And they said it's beyond dispute. Today, no one admits this. Every single member of the Palestinian cabinet today makes a mantra of saying that Solomon's temple, if it did exist, not in Palestine. It wasn't there.
I think all the religions need to do some soul searching at this point and need to be talking about other religions maybe a little bit less and looking into their own hearts and soul searching in terms of their own religions a little more, atoning for their own errors and asking if they themselves are walking as God would have them walk on the earth. Because whether you're talking about Islam or you're talking about Judaism or you're talking about Christianity, we are called to be the people that God would have us be. And the people that God would have us be, according to all the great religions of the world, are people who build peace because we love one another. To tolerate you doesn't go far enough. To love you is where we need to be.
Of course, we as Christians believe that Jesus is resurrected and that in a certain sense, he becomes our temple. In a certain sense, Jesus is a temple of God, a place where man and God meet. And in the discourse of Christians in following generations, there will be the discourse of each of us being called to constitute in our bodies, individually, and in our communities, communally, the temple of God. And our identity focuses on Jesus Christ and our awareness that Jesus lived in this land and was a son of the people of this land. The fact that Jesus is a Jew, we teach that all over the Catholic Church today.
I was moderating a forum. Half of them were from Israel, and half of them were from several Arab countries. And very sophisticated, successful people. And one of the Israelis looks across the table, in this case at the guy from Saudi Arabia, and says, I've never in my life sat face to face with someone from Saudi. And the Saudi guy looks back at him and says, I've never in my life sat face to face with an Israeli. They only knew each other through all of the filters, and I would suggest all of the distorting filters of political leadership, religious leadership, and mass media.
I can really see a lot of factions within our communities that are ready tomorrow morning to begin the long trip towards achieving peace in the Middle East. We, the Muslims, and we as Islamists, together with Arab Markeol, we are cooperating for many years to create a new atmosphere.
Well, there are those who think that you can just sit down together around the negotiation table and cut a deal. And then we'll solve all our problems after that. And we've tried that again and again and again. The Oslo process, Camp David process, Annapolis process, all the processes. We've been going down a blind alley again and again and again. Sometimes we've been driving down this blind alley with 4 flat tires. The problem is that in the meantime, there are less and less people who believe that a solution is possible. If they don't believe it's possible, it's not going to happen. It never happened anywhere when people didn't believe it was possible. So how do we restore the belief?
I come from a business background where made a lot of deals. And the key is each side has to feel like there's a potential to make a deal, a potential to move forward. And at that point, you work out some of the particulars. But if you don't believe that there's potential, nothing happens.
I teach a course called Introduction to Judaism. What's my biggest problem when I walk into the class? Okay? My biggest problem is my students know exactly everything they want to know about who Jews are. Jews are soldiers, settlers, and policemen. And that's all they know, and it's all they want to know. And my challenge is, over a semester, to break that, to get them to think that Jews go way beyond historically, geographically, sociologically, soldiers, settlers, and police. But I can never deny that the vast majority of Jews they've ever come into contact with are soldiers, policemen, and settlers.
I've seen the wall that separates Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank. When my father passed away, we were not able to get him back to Palestine. The Israelis forbade it and prohibited us from having him buried in Palestine, where he was born. And so I attempted to go back to Jerusalem to get some soil, or just to, pray for him at Masjid al-Aqsa. I had taken a van that goes specifically to Jerusalem. And the van was boarded by Israeli soldiers, one of whom was clearly an Eastern European man of no more than maybe 20, 21 years old, with a machine gun. The Israeli soldier checked my passport, removed me from the bus, just told me that I couldn't go into Jerusalem. They refused to give me an explanation as to why. I insisted that I had the right to go to Jerusalem. I insisted that I was born here. I insisted that I spoke Arabic, that this was my home, my land, and that they could hardly speak Hebrew, let alone Arabic. They raised their guns at me, and at that point I decided to turn around and find my way back to Nablus.
You can't make a solution only with the peace now of Israel and the peace now of Palestinians. The 2% here and the 2% there. We need to have a solution of region and of religion.
Yeah, the Pope stopped a moment, some minutes, at the wall in Bethlehem, in a silent attitude of prayer. Why? Because this wall is a sign of division, a sign of lack of peace in the region. And then we have to pray God to help us to build a world in which we don't need any more walls.
When you get to 2002, Israel is losing roughly 120, 130 Israelis every month. In other words, 130 people die every month from these suicide bombing attacks. And what Israel does is it builds a security fence, because prior to that, the distances between Israel and the West Bank cities are nothing. And a Palestinian suicide bomber could put on a backpack, load it with dynamite, have triggers in the front, make this brief little stroll, and kill 20, 30 Israelis at will. That situation was intolerable. And therefore, a security fence had to be put in place. And in some areas, it actually looked like a wall, particularly in urban areas. Israel didn't want to build a security fence. It did not want to put up any walls. But when you're losing upwards of 130 people a month, you have no choice but to protect your civilians.
There is no alternative. There is either peace or hell. There is nothing in between here. The question is when and at what price. But human being is a social being, and people eventually, even the worst enemies, reconcile and look into the very common basic background that brings them together. We all want to bring up our children. We all want to sleep safely at our homes. And we all want to find the loaf of bread and the pursuit of justice. All human beings like that. And these are enough after the failure of all other alternatives to create some kind of peace. And we just hope that it is accelerated so that we don't shed more blood.
I was living there in my ideal world of world peace soon through the installment of two states, because why should we, Jews in Israel, be so mean to the Palestinians? I mean, I didn't want to be subjugating anyone, other people. I felt bad as a Jew that believing all of that we heard that Israel is an occupier. And then there was the lynch of soldiers in Ramallah. And what I saw wasn't upset with an occupier, quote unquote occupier. What I saw was hatred. Hatred that just leads to the worst kind of barbarity. And I really started to change then.
You don't tell an oppressed people how to resist oppression. You don't tell a people who are being killed and massacred how to stop the person from killing them. You don't tell somebody who's painted in a corner, whose son is in jail, whose home was demolished, and who is now sitting under an Israeli rifle, how he is allowed to protect himself from that Israeli rifle.
We were afraid of getting killed anywhere. You didn't know where you were safe. You go on a bus, you might die. You go to a cafe, you might die. You go to a nightclub, you might die. There was a cafe right near my house, Cafe Moment. So I was gonna go to Cafe Moment that night with a friend of mine, but that movie was on. And I remember in the middle of the movie, I heard a boom. And I already knew when I heard that boom that something was wrong. And I went outside and walked closer to the cafe and saw a body on the ground. And I saw the lights were out. And I already knew that, wow, you know, it's like literally 50 yards away. And I had an ex-boyfriend who died in that attack. People I knew from the scene, I kind of went out a lot. I was in the nightlife scene in Jerusalem at the time. People I knew, I mean, people I would dance with in a nightclub were dead, were gone.
I don't have to explain that Israel has not stopped being the aggressor. The mask of the eternal victim fighting for its eternal survival, that has fallen. We're dealing with the reality. The reality is that you have one population, considered the 5th strongest army in the world, with nuclear weapons, organized, supported by the world's largest power, financially and militarily, facing an unorganized, unarmied people.
But now we have a way to defend ourselves. Now we can fight back. And I think the delegitimization of Israel, and especially Zionism, is not letting Jews have self-defense. And I think that proves my argument that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, let Jews be defenseless, let them go to the slaughter. And now we're not gonna let that happen. And I think that really pisses off the people who want Jews subjugated and killed.
Ce qui est frappant à l'heure actuelle, depuis le début de cette guerre qui est maintenant mondiale, face à une oppression nazie, fasciste, nazie quand elle s'attaque aux Juifs comme ils l'ont fait en France. il y a une cohérence. Il faut marquer les esprits, il faut faire peur. Vous avez toute une logique qui s'est appliquée au niveau de Charlie Hebdo, qui s'est appliquée aussi à l'hypercachère. C'est pas la clé de la solution, simplement le conflit israélo-palestinien, parce que si c'était la clé, ça fait longtemps qu'on l'aurait résolu. Le conflit est beaucoup plus compliqué que ça.
We have two peoples living here, between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River. There are two peoples living nearly equal in size. And we have to work it out here. I believe that not only the Jewish people has a right to be here, not only a historic and judicial right to be here, but also that this is part of God's plan. If I believe that this is God's plan, then I can't believe that it's an accident of history that there's another people living here. The Palestinian people, they're here. And therefore, it doesn't matter the whole discussion, which we go back to the whole time, if Zionism is justified or if there's a Palestinian people or not. Doesn't matter. We're here now. Both of us are here now. And if we believe that God is somehow a part of history, then this is part of history. Then God wants us to work it out here together.
If you don't fill a room with light, it will be dark. And if you don't proactively use your mind to express and to give love, there will be fear. Love is radical. And because it is the commitment to love each other despite, not to love you if you do what I want, not to love you if you agree with me, but to love you because you're another human being, because you're another child of God. That, to me, is the holy ground. And it is radical, because we live in a world filled with conditions. I love you if you do this. But God doesn't love us if we do this. God loves us. And I think our spiritual mission on the earth is to love as God loves.
There should be a way for coexistence together. They can live. There is enough space for everybody, I say. Why shouldn't they? Why couldn't they? They could do it. It's a beautiful city.
You know, when we stop thinking that we can reach in our lifetime peace process, a peace agreement, we'll be desperate and people will intend to be more religious and more utopian about the city. But believe me, my kids keep asking me about swimming pool. There's no swimming pool in East Jerusalem for Palestinians. This is what they are asking me, and not the narrative, and not the Haram Al-Sharif, and not the holy places. This is what counts. Are we going to give this new generation a better life? There's a shortage of 1,000 classrooms in East Jerusalem. there's a shortage of 25,000 housing units. These young couples, they need to have a proper home to live. And they need this to be connected to high-speed internet. They need to have coffee shops. They need to have a public space. They need to have green areas. This is what the Palestinians want, like everyone, like all human beings. But they don't want to go and to fight, to defend holy stones.
Step by step, we're decreasing some of the gaps in schools that are below standard, creating more classrooms, creating infrastructure and roads, connecting the different neighborhoods that were not connected well enough with public transport and the tram and the light rail. So the idea is to understand where the gaps are and close them. And I think that today all the residents, including the Arab residents of Jerusalem, see as mayor, I'm totally committed to close them.
Je ne sais pas si on peut poser la question sur la relation entre les religions par rapport à ce qui se passe. Parce que ça voudrait dire qu'on accrédite aux terroristes et à ceux qui mènent les guerres une légitimité religieuse. Or, justement, en termes de communication, il faut déconnecter Al-Qaïda, Daesh, du lien avec la religion.
Religion is used both as a cover by those who hate, as well as a conduit for those who love. So there's a certain kind of false respect that certain religious corners of the world do not deserve. Haters need to be called out. And sometimes haters use, as I said, the cover of religion.
Il faut vraiment les appeler tels qu'ils sont. Ce sont des nazis. C'est une nouvelle forme de nazisme. C'est-à-dire qu'avec un certain nombre d'idées, ils ont décidé de tuer tout le monde. Ils tuent les enfants dans les écoles, ils tuent les journalistes, ils tuent les dessinateurs, ils tuent les femmes, ils violent. Tout ce qui est d'ailleurs absolument pas dans les préceptes du Coran. Hein. Évidemment, ils s'en prennent aux juifs, ils s'en prennent aux chrétiens, ils s'en prennent aux coptes, etc., etc., etc.
And then the Pope has invited the two presidents to the Vatican, to his home.
I think recent His Holiness Pope visited there. I think wonderful. And he immediately, you see, invite the presidents of Israeli and Palestine. Wonderful, wonderful. So he really now, I said, they carrying some active role. It was wonderful.
One religious value says that the whole land belongs to God, and we're temporary residents here. One religious value says that life is more important than land. Land is important, but it's not the most important. So if you have a clash of values and you can save life, human life, then that is a higher value in the hierarchy of values, of religious values. Therefore, from a religious perspective, you're allowed to make that compromise.
Well, I think there is no reason not to achieve any kind of historical compromise between the Palestinian nation and the Israelis in this Holy Land. There is no reason.
There's one school of thought that the Israeli-Palestinian issue is quite simple. that it's about territory, and if you can only figure out the exact way to draw the lines, you could then move on to the next challenge in life. I tend not to subscribe to that school of thought. There's a territorial dimension, but there's any number of other dimensions. There's psychological dimensions, there's political dimensions, there's historical dimensions, there's security dimensions, there's economic dimensions. There's dimensions we probably haven't even yet imagined. So territory, yes, is a part of it. But even if one could resolve the territorial issues, it's not going to be enough. There's a lot more to it.
There could be coexistence here, if there could be a compromise that's built on creativity, if the diversity can be an asset and not a liability, then Jerusalem itself could be the trigger to moving this region forward. In the same way that Isaiah in chapter 2 looked sort of like being a light onto the nations, where it is a place of morality, creativity, and light. Big light.
I put this one on the cover of my book, if you notice over here. I call it, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. This is how I take it. Character-wise, there is a lot of change. The streets, they are the same. The people are changing a lot. The demography of the city is changing a lot. It's bad in a way, because I take Jerusalem as a piece of beautiful mosaic, pieces. Jews, Arabs, Christians, Armenians, Greeks, Copts, everything. Take out one piece, the whole picture is ruined. It should stay as it is. I always say that.
It's very important to maintain the status quo and maintain the mosaic of this city, because this is really the beauty of Jerusalem. I don't know if you've been there, but this is what makes Jerusalem a beautiful place with that history. So it's that history that we should keep, not the political history of saying no this and that and going on and killing and justifying killing. That is not necessary.
In this one, you see people eating hummus. I call it, it never changes. This one, for example, he's eating his fingers. It must be so delicious. It's fantastic. Or the one on this side, he's eating, his mouth is full, and yet he's dipping more. Pictures like this. You can see the chubbiness. In those days, it was just simple mother's milk. No vitamins, no Cerelac, no nothing. Things like this he used to take, my father. The beauty of this picture, it really is, you feel the motion, the way he's beating the drum, or the swinging of the skirt, and the connection of their eyes. It's so beautiful.
It has to take generations to untie the knots. Nonetheless, we can pave the road and regain the very important element in human history, hope. Now we have no hope. If we can take certain steps that creates hope, even if they are very baby steps, but consistent, then that's better than despair. Despair is worse than death, but hope is the prelude to life.
Il faut être optimiste parce que l'humanité s'est toujours sortie des guerres. Et c'est là qu'il faut s'en sortir. Comment ça se fera? En quelle durée? Je ne suis pas devin, j'en sais rien. Je ne sais pas. Ce que je sais, c'est que tout le monde, tous ceux qui nous regardent, tout le monde est acteur de ce processus et que ça se fera qu'avec le point de rencontre de toutes les religions, d'ailleurs, de toutes les croyances, c'est la laïcité. Voilà.
Signore Presidenti, il mondo è un'eredità che abbiamo ricevuto dai nostri antenati, è vero, ma è anche un prestito dei nostri figli, figli che sono stanchi e sfiniti dai conflitti e desiderosi di raggiungere l'alba della pace. Per fare la pace ci vuole coraggio, molto di più che per fare la guerra. Ci vuole coraggio per dire sì all'incontro e no allo scontro, sì al dialogo e no alla violenza, sì al negoziato e no alle ostilità, sì al rispetto dei patti e no alle provocazioni, sì alla sincerità e no alla doppiezza. Per tutto questo ci vuole coraggio, grande forza di animo.
The great majority of the people in both communities want peace. But these extreme elements keep on sort of punching way above their weight. And what I say to my friends in both Palestine and Israel all the time is, the extremists are willing to die for what they believe in. What are you willing to do? What are you actually willing to do? Not, oh, that's terrible, or I don't agree with it, or something, but what are you actually willing to do? And when people say to me, what can I do? The problems are too big. What am I supposed to do? I'm just a guy, and I'm trying to, support my family and, go to my job. What am I supposed to do? I ask people to think about the idea of what I call concrete baby steps. It's something concrete that you do as an individual that potentially makes some kind of a difference. That could be learning more about someone else's religion. That could be engaging with a family from a different religion. That's the idea that that you actually know me, even though you've hardly met me, because if I can look into your eye and you can feel my humanity and I can feel yours, we can have a different kind of a discussion. And if in that discussion, if I place compassion in the center of how I look at the problem, how I look at you, how I look at your overall circumstance, compassion is in the middle of the middle, that changes all the math. If compassion was the thing that we were after in Israel and in Palestine, it'd be a completely different conversation. Absolutely, completely different.
It's nice. I really like the mix between the cultures, Arabic and Jewish. It's really nice to see how it can work out.
I went to Catholic church. So big church, so amazing.
I think I'm gonna experience some nice atmosphere, beautiful people, beautiful streets, some sun, because I'm not used to it.
It's a holy land for all the humans. I'm not telling Muslims, Christian, because all people.
This area, the old city, it has such aroma of diversity and culture and holiness.
You literally have elements of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam in the same region, and it's crazy to think that, you know, there's so many differences that exist between them all, but they work so well in the one place.